a loss like that. Now, this tendency for them to to sort of internalize that stuff, and think that everything that happens has to do with them, that can very much affect self-esteem. Because if you can imagine, if you feel like dad left you because you weren't good enough, as an adult, you're going to grow in, you're going to not maybe feel so good about yourself. You're always going to kind of grow up with this sort of lingering feeling. Maybe it's unconscious, but some lingering feeling that maybe I'm not good enough, or I'm not, so it can affect your self-esteem. And ultimately, when your self-esteem isn't very good, you can end up with trouble with depression. So it's definitely stuff, things to keep in mind. Speaking of self-esteem, where does that come from? And I think, we all sort of know this. I hope all of us know this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case. There may be some folks that don't. But the child, parents and teachers and the folks that are around the child as it's growing, as the child is growing up and developing, they're the people that shape that child's brain into what it's going to become. Okay, and that goes for self-esteem too. So, example, if you have a little boy and you constantly berate him and tell him nothing's ever good enough, you can't do anything right, that kind of thing. You're irritated with him all the time. Well, how do you think he's going to feel about himself growing up? I mean, it's not going to be very good, is it? He's going to always think that nothing's ever good enough. He's always going to feel like, nothing I can do in Dad's eyes is good enough. And that's going to give him a bit of a chip on his shoulder and feel pretty bad about himself, and self-esteem is going to be poor, and then set him up for trouble with depression as a child or as an adult. So instead of being critical like that, it's better to give guidance, reassurance, positive attention. So when he does something right, you reward that instead of constantly criticizing something he's doing wrong. Basically, in a nutshell, kids model after parents. To a great degree. They watch how we do everything. It's amazing, I'll start to get angry and my son will look at me, he's 4, and he'll look up at me with these big bright eyes, Not in any fear. It's more like, what's he going to do next? I can't wait to see. Because that's what I'm going to do when I get mad. If Dad's doing it, it must be the right thing, And, I catch myself and I go, wow, better stop here for a second. You kind of have to pretend like you're being, pretend Big Brother's watching or something every time you're with your kids, So you start to go off in anger, you start to have, some issue. Make sure you stop, try to stop and objectively think about it and think, is this the right way is this what I want to teach him? Is this how I want him to grow up, and react when he's an adult? We'll go into that in a few minutes some more, but they do model everything after us. It's amazing how much they absorb. Even things that we say, like there are things about me that I say a lot, and I'm sure you guys realize it. I don't realize it. We're all that way, though. We don't see our own stuff as easy as other people do. But it's amazing because, once in a while, a 4-year-old will come up and say something, it'll just be like deja vu. It's something that I've said, I must say a lot, because now they're starting to mimic it and say the same thing. So it's kind of interesting. Wanted to go into the sort of the final thing I want to talk about tonight, and that is emotional intelligence. Again, I had done this talk before, and I don't know, maybe Laura, you might have seen this one already, but I had never filmed it. So emotional intelligence, I think, is something that I don't think a lot of people know about. I think you had some knowledge about last time, but yeah, I guess I have websites, and I'm going to show this anyway. But there's some books, that's what I was going to show you, some books on this, so we'll open up to that first. But emotional intelligence, what the heck does that mean? You've heard of IQ, right? Intelligence quotient. The EQ, or emotional quotient, some people call it the EQ, I don't know, but emotional intelligence is basically a child's ability, or anybody's ability, to recognize emotion and modulate it, know how to deal with it in a healthy way. So I think, unfortunately, in our society, a lot of folks don't do this very well. Anything emotional, and they just want to clam up and just avoid it. Any kind of emotion, whether it's happiness, sadness, any of that stuff. They just, certainly crying and things like that. I mean, how many times have you heard that? Oh, suck it up, quit crying. Don't be a baby, don't be a crybaby, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's an emotion. We have that ability for some reason. God or whoever created us gave us this ability, and it's there for a reason. It's probably some sort of outlet for our emotions is actually what it is. But, you know, it's funny to hear folks, you know, folks say those things. But, you know, in emotional intelligence, what they've discovered is that folks that have high emotional intelligence are much more likely to succeed in life than folks that are just plain intelligent. And because you can be extremely book smart and intelligent, but if you can't deal with people, which obviously emotional intelligence helps you with, if you can't deal with people, you're not going to go very far in our society. I mean, you know, you could live like the Unabomber in the mountains, I suppose, and be just fine, but I'm not sure that's the best way to live. So most of us, we have jobs, we interact with people at work, we have bosses, we have spouses, we have kids and other family members, you know, a lot of interactions with people. This emotional intelligence, you know, I think a lot of us sort of take it for granted if we have it. And even if we don't have it, we don't know anything about it, and it's not a big deal. So I guess I'm trying to talk a little bit about it tonight so that folks realize that I think it's just as important as raising our kids to be academically smart. So yeah, it's good to focus on learning all your math facts and all your reading and all this. That's great, and that'll come, you know, so put some emphasis on it, that's fine. But don't forget the emotional stuff. If you can give your child that ability to be emotionally intelligent growing up and going into adulthood, that child's going to succeed. And actually the folks that, this Daniel Goleman is the next page here. I'll go ahead and flip that. He wrote this book, Emotional Intelligence, which is a very good book if you want to check it out. It talks a lot about this stuff. And they had looked at some CEOs of some big companies in the country, and they found that a lot of these folks had very high emotional intelligence levels. They weren't necessarily always the smartest people. They weren't necessarily the geniuses of the company. There were a lot of geniuses in the company, but they weren't, you know, they weren't the CEOs. The CEOs were the ones that could deal with people. Sort of makes sense, right? They advanced up the ladder by being able to deal with people. If you can't deal with people, you're not getting a promotion, probably, right? You know, so you're getting put in a lab somewhere, you know, and forgotten about it, I suppose. But so this emotional intelligence, you know, it very much gives kids a leg up, so to speak. And the kids will learn this from us. Again, just like I said, they'll take it from us. If we're doing it, they'll sort of mimic that. They'll model that. If we're not doing it, then they will never know any different. They'll just grow up thinking emotions are bad and you know, or something to be ignored anyway, and not dealt with, not spoken of. And of course, nobody benefits from that situation. But these, you know, the kids that get these traits, they tend to be able to control their impulses better. They can delay gratification better. I mean, how many kids these days can do that? Not too many, right? They want something, they want it now, baby. Give it to me now. Quick and easy thing. Of course, all of us, to some degree, are like that. It's hard to find somebody anymore that can, you know, they can work and work and work and put a lot of work into something to get something at the end. You know, a lot of times these days, folks, you know, even as a doctor, I can tell you, they come to my office and I tell them, I think you should do some cognitive behavioral therapy. That's going to be the best treatment for your panic disorder or whatever. No, doc, just give me a pill. I want to fix it. Just give me a pill. I want to fix it quick. I don't have to work at it. You know, weight loss, same thing. You know, you quit the smoke. You don't want to work at it. It's too much work. You know, so delayed gratification is kind of a hard thing, and this emotional intelligence can teach kids that. They tend to be able to motivate themselves better if they're more emotionally intelligent. Kids are anyway. The kids that are. They read social cues better, and they cope with stress better too. They tend to be. And you'll see this, some kids are just sort of like this, or even from the get-go, but they'll see another little child in the room crying, and they'll walk up to the little child and give him a teddy bear and, you know, give him a hug or something. You know, that's an emotionally intelligent child. They recognized that there was hurt in that other child, and they went over and tried to do something about it. That's emotional intelligence. You know, a lot of us would, you know, certainly as adults, you know, I don't know that we would all feel comfortable doing that kind of thing. One little quick digression is that, you know, I think some people have a difficult time with this emotional intelligence, and I think one of the things, this is my own theory, so just take it for what it's worth, but I was thinking about some stuff I read about autism. You know, they have discovered that, you know, with autism, I don't know if you know much about that, but with autism, kids that have, or folks that have autism, they're very socially averse. They don't want to be, they don't have social contact with you, and if you meet them, they won't look you in the eye. They won't hardly look at your face. They'll look down or look away. And so scientists tried to figure out why was that, what the heck's going on there. And they discovered there's a part of the brain that we all probably take for granted but it's a part of the brain that that allows us to look at someone's face and read the cues as to how this interaction is going, you know? So if Laura's smiling at me, then I feel like it's going pretty well, you know? If she's gritting her teeth and kind of looking like that, I feel like, boy, I better back off a little bit. I better stop talking about whatever I'm talking about, because she's obviously getting pretty ticked off, and I may lose my head, you know? So, you know, I have this ability to read what by looking at her face only, really. I mean, sometimes the rest of the body too, but a lot of it's the face. There's a part of the brain that controls that. Okay, and they looked at that part of the brain in folks with autism, and they found it wasn't functioning like it should. So think about it. I mean, these are folks that they'll look at you and they can't tell. I mean, you're sure shooting, you could be wanting to rip their head off. They wouldn't have any idea. They can't tell if you're happy, sad, or what kind of emotion, or how that interaction is going at all. So what would you do if it was you? You'd avoid it too, wouldn't you? I'd avoid it. I wouldn't want to deal with it. I'd look away, you know, I'd kind of cower away. I wouldn't want to be around people. It fits, doesn't it? To me, it fits perfectly. So think about it for a second. To be emotionally intelligent, that part of the brain has to be functioning. And I guess the more functional it is, the better off you are at reading social cues from somebody and realizing, okay, I better tone it down a little bit, I better shift the topic a little bit, I'm kind of ticking them off a little bit, that kind of thing. I think that I've seen in my practice a spectrum along a line from autism, where you can't read cues at all, to being able to do that very, very well and being very emotionally intelligent. So I think there are some folks here in the middle that aren't autistic by any stretch, but they have a difficult time. I mean, they'll look at you right in the eye and they'll tell you something disturbing. And even though you're sitting there going, like, you know, jaws dropping, because I can't believe you're saying this to me, they can't get it. They just keep going. They go on and on and on about it, right? Certainly some people probably do that on purpose for effect, but I think a lot of people, I've seen people who just have a very difficult time in relationships and interacting with people, because every time they do, they tend to tick people off or rub them the wrong way. And I don't think it's on purpose. I think it's because they can't read the cue of how it's going with that person in interaction. So I think if you don't have that ability, I think that part of the brain isn't working like it should, and maybe, you know, I'm not saying these folks are all autistic. These are just folks that have a difficult time with this reading social cues. And I think emotional intelligence might be difficult for them in a way. Maybe not impossible. They could, if they learned about it, they could probably do a better job. But you know, it's definitely kind of an interesting thing to think about. Okay. You know, they call parents that these guys, these authors, call parents that do this emotion, that teach their kids emotional intelligence. They call them emotion coaches. That's kind of a little bit hokey, I think. You know, I don't know if I want to call it that or not, but they've done some. They've looked at this. They've looked at how parents that do this effectively, how do they do it? And first of all, they don't necessarily. These parents, they don't object to the kids' displays of emotion or ignore them, but instead they accept the negative emotion as kind of a fact of life. You know, emotion's going to happen. You're going to have emotions and this kind of thing. And then they use this emotional outburst from this child as a way of teaching the child about emotions and how to deal with them. They usually do this in 5 different steps. One is they become aware of the child's emotion. So that's the first thing. And then they recognize the emotion as instead of getting all caught up in it and reacting to it in some way, they look at it and say, you know, I could use this to teach this kid something, you know? So they sort of detach a little bit and they think about how they can teach the child using this emotion. They listen empathically and they validate the child's feelings instead of ignoring it or saying, you know, quit your crying, suck it up, you know, quit being a crybaby, that kind of thing. Fourth, they help the child find words to label their emotions so that the child can say, I'm sad, or I'm angry, or whatever, and, you know, and sort of normalize it a little bit. Okay, yeah, that's okay to be angry and sad. All of us get that way. And then the fifth thing is they set limits while helping the child solve the problem at hand. Setting limits, I mean, you know, making sure that they're not going to get hurt in some way from throwing a tantrum or something like that. Now they've done some research. These guys have done some research, you know, trying to find out what difference does it make in a child's life to be emotionally coached. And what they found is the kids that have the parents that do this emotion coaching, and again, I don't know if the parents would call it that, but just they're sort of modeling emotional intelligence for them. These kids tend to be physically healthier, score higher academically, they get along better with friends and have fewer behavior problems, and are less likely to act violently than kids of parents who don't do this emotion coaching. They also tend to have fewer negative feelings and more positive ones, and overall are more healthy emotionally. They're more resilient in the face of stress. They can soothe themselves better. I think that's kind of an important thing. I mean, they get stressed out, something's not going right in their life. They can sort of soothe themselves through that a little better. Whereas I think kids, a lot of us have a harder time doing that. They bounce back from distress better, and also, you know, this emotional intelligence and the emotion coaching has been shown to help protect kids from the harmful effects of marital conflict and divorce, such as like school failure, rejection by their kids, depression, and antisocial behaviors. So, you know, that's a pretty tough time for a kid when their parents are not getting along or are going to go through a divorce. And, you know, I think for a child to be able to modulate their feelings and kind of accept their feelings and deal with them in some way, that's much more healthy than a child who doesn't know how to deal with it or doesn't think it's appropriate to deal with it and never does. Or, you know, or does 15 years later when they blow up and get angry at whichever parent left or whatever. Interesting, one other piece of information is they've done they looked at to see, you know, who does the emotion coaching and who's, you know, what effect does it have on the kids. Believe it or not, it turns out to be the fathers that seem to have the most effect when they did this. I'm not sure why that is. It stumps me a little bit. You tend to think of moms being more emotional and maybe the kids responding to that better, but what they found was that the fathers, you know, had a bigger influence on the kids. So if the father was more, you know, emotionally distant or harsh or critical or dismissing of the child's emotions, that has a pretty deep negative impact on the child, even more so than when a mother does that. These kids that have fathers that do these things, they tend to do more poorly at school, they fight more, their overall health is worse. And I think this is kind of alarming because it turns out about 28% or more of American kids are growing up in homes without fathers, without positive male figures in their lives. And, you know, even if there is a male figure, how many of them are actually doing emotion coaching? I would think very few, probably. Men, I mean, for some reason, not to pick on me, I am one after all. I can't really diss the men too bad since I am one. But I think men in general don't tend to, well, I just think we're not as emotional to start with. I think things don't affect us as much or as harshly, I suppose, emotionally as it does for women, which I think is a genetic or inborn thing. But it's not to say we don't have emotions, because let me tell you, I'm a man, I know I have emotions, okay? So all of us do, all of us men do. I think a lot of us, though, I think it's society that tells us that we shouldn't. You know, that emotions are, well, mainly it's like sadness and things like that. Those are forms of weakness, is what society tells us. So I think even though there's families that have fathers in them, I think a lot of them are not really doing a very good job of this emotion coaching. You know, this emotion coaching thing we're talking about, it's like anything else. It takes work. I mean, it isn't easy, you know, so nothing good comes from anything easy. That's what I always say, you know. You can't do anything quick and easy and have it be very beneficial for you. But if you put the work in it, and the analogy these guys used in their book, and this other John Gottman in this Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, the analogy he uses is like if you're teaching your child, for fathers, you know, if you're teaching your child or coaching your child to play baseball, you know, you don't avoid the game, right? How are they going to get any good if you avoid the games? It's not, you don't avoid the game, but you put on your glove and your ball and get your ball and your bat and you go out and you play, right? You practice over and over again. And it's no different with this emotion coaching. You know, you coach just like you would for a sport, except this time we're dealing with emotions. And you know, just talking about the emotions is better than doing nothing, I think. And so I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. I did put up these the books. I had those up for a few minutes, and then there are these websites. These websites are There are various different websites. This one is Emotional Intelligence, is the EI, and then it's consortia.org. New Horizons and Teleris.org, those are both child and brain development websites. So they'll tell you about some of the new science. Some of the stuff came from these websites that I talked about tonight. And then, of course, I got to put a plug in for the old it'sabrainthing.com, or It's a Brain Thing. It's on YouTube, so this video will actually be on there maybe tomorrow or the next day. And that's pretty much all I want to say tonight. Does anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? Went through this with you before, probably about a year ago, so you probably don't have any new questions on anything. You see this, though, in everyday life, I would imagine.
Most definitely.
Most definitely, yeah. Yeah.
Just about 40 years late.
I'm just about 40 years late?
I am
You're just about 40 years late?
40 years late hearing all this.
Yeah. You know what, though? The comment was he's about 40 years late of learning this stuff, and I apologize. I'm 38 years old, so I couldn't have helped you 40 years ago. But I will say that that's exactly why I'm doing this. I mean, this stuff is not brand new. I mean, it's been out for a while. But the general public, I don't think, knows about this stuff. Why? I don't know why, because nobody got up and said anything about it, I suppose. And so I figured, I got the knowledge. Somebody needs to get it out there. We might as well try. And actually, the internet, it's just been fascinating. I've had folks from, I don't know if you heard me mention last time, but I've had folks from China and Australia and the UK, all over the world that are hitting this thing. Not huge numbers, but enough that that folks are sending messages saying, hey, thanks for doing this. It really hit home to me. And if I can change the life of even one child by this talk, let's say, and somebody watches this thing, and a lot of these folks on the internet are younger folks. They're in their 20s or even late teens. Eventually, they're going to have kids. So maybe they'll watch this video or save this video or something, and they'll say, when I have my child, I'm going to watch this and see if I can't make a difference. So maybe then 40 years later, they'll be saying, gosh, I'm glad I learned that. So anyway, we'll see what happens. But I apologize, I couldn't have helped you 40 years ago.
Guys 40 years ago
Wouldn't have touched it.
No.
Wouldn't have paid attention.
Wouldn't have
Listen.
touched it.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Guys now are a lot different. They're so much more involved with their families and their kids.
You think so?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I think they've had to be. The two career households.
Yeah, with the women working more. Yeah, the comment was that
Takes both.
that guys are much more involved.
2 careers in my day.
Yeah.
The guys were different, I'm telling you.
Is that right?
Oh, I watch them. You can go to ball games and things now, and compared to when my kids were little, it's just like I'm 63 years old. It's like a different world. Watching how many guys
They
have
react.
hands-on with their little kids, help the mom with the
Yeah.
little ones, and it's
Right.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good thing. It's good to hear that society's changing in a good way.
It really is. It really is.
That's good.
When we were having kids, the husband worked and the wife raised the kids. The husband was busy or didn't put a lot into the kids. He was busy working. Now, it's the same thing. Both parents are working, but both parents are working and raising the kids now. Whereas I didn't feel like that when I was 20 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
I was
So-
busy working, 2 jobs usually.
Do you think that's you think the change is because society expects more out of men now, or do you think it's because there's just folks understand raising kids more and the importance of the father and all
I
this?
think that.
The last part?
Yeah, I think so. And just like one example that really blows me away is my grandson has a substitute teacher right now because his regular teacher, who is a man, is off because they have a brand new baby. And he
Yeah.
took a leave to help his mom.
Yeah, we've
Never
had
heard
friends.
that.
Yeah.
Never heard of that. Come on.
Well, and I think in a lot of professions, the guy couldn't do that. But I think in teaching, is it equal? Is that
My
right? Laura?
husband was off when we had our kids.
Yeah, and I have another friend who both were teachers, the husband and the wife, and they took like, he took a year off. Well, I forget how it was. Maybe she took a year off the first year the child was, alive, and then the second year he took the year off. And so together, I mean, they alternated basically staying home with that child while the other one worked. And that's a pretty novel thing. I would imagine back in 30, 40 years ago that probably didn't happen very often. I would know.
Never. Guys didn't do it.
Yeah. Right.
Work to get paid.
Right, and I guess, when you both were teachers, you're both making about the same salary and all that. I think in other relationships, it may be different. If the man's making a heck of a lot more money, 3 or 4 times more than the woman might, or vice versa, it's hard to lose that income, I think. So, but, it's interesting. I've only been a parent for a few years here, and so I don't have the perspective, that it used to be that much different, I suppose. So.
Well, and then when I worked, we didn't have paid maternity leaves. We got the time off,
You were guaranteed your job
but it was exactly.
when you came with that. Yeah.
Some places would, when you got pregnant, you're gone.
Is that right?
Oh,
They fired you?
Well, years ago at Western Electric, women hid their pregnancies.
Yeah.
Wow.
Years ago, because when they found out.
That's incredible. Be lawsuits
Seems like
left and right in this day and age for that,
Change it all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Companies wouldn't be in business very long ago now.